Well, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And to Steve and to the board, I greatly appreciate having me as your guest today. Been wonderful hosts in a beautiful city. My first time in Stockholm, and it's been a wonderful trip so far. In America, we have a real fascination with watching little men try to hit a ball with sticks, commonly referred to as baseball. Well, in fact, in the 2010 season for Major League Baseball, over 75 million tickets were sold just to watch men hit leather balls with sticks. So it shouldn't be a surprise that one of the most popular movies of the generation in America was a movie called Field of Dreams. How many of you have seen the movie Field of Dreams? A few hands. Well, unbelievably, we have a story of a man who lives on a farm and has ghosts talking to him, telling him to build a baseball diamond in his cornfield. And if he builds this baseball diamond, long dead baseball players will emerge and play baseball in his cornfield. The ghost keeps whispering a certain phrase. If you build it, they will come. And you can see a scene from the movie where these ghosts come from the cornfield to play ball in a baseball field. Well, I'm not here to talk about baseball. I'm here to talk about diesels in the U.S., the challenges and opportunities that we have, but I think this phrase fits the message for what we're talking about today. If you build it, they will come. So let me first tell you a little bit about our coalition, of which SinterCast is a member. We're here to promote diesels in the U.S., period. That's our goal. Our group is the only group that is dedicated to promoting light-duty diesel in the U.S. marketplace. And we don't want anything special. We're not asking for handouts. We're not asking for incentives. All we want is a level playing field for all technologies, including diesel. And if we get that, we're convinced that diesels can compete in the U.S. marketplace. Our group formed in 2009. It's a little over 2 years old. We have 4 key members of our coalition. And all of our members add value in different ways. You'll see some big names on there. You'll see SinterCast on there. They all add different expertise, product expertise, facilities and locations. We have obviously 535 members of Congress. So when you have multiple sites that hold employees, you can go to different members of Congress and say how you employ people in their districts. That's an important component of what we do. Having the product expertise and the ability to talk about it is important. And it's important to know that our members are all technology companies, period. They sell hybrids, electrics, batteries, you name it, they make it for the automakers. So they don't have an axe to grind. They don't have something they need to do for diesels. They just firmly believe that diesels have a role to play in the U.S. marketplace. So we've appreciated SinterCast's involvement. They've been actively engaged, and they've especially been very helpful at opening doors within the industry to people to make sure that we can talk to our customers, the OEMs, the automakers that make the products. And that's been an important part of what we do. We are there to support them. The challenges and opportunities. Supply and demand is a big one. One big challenge in the U.S. is currently the supply. There is demand for diesels. There just isn't enough models to really take full advantage of the demand that we have. Let's take a look at some slides. Education on advanced diesels is having an impact. You'll see that just in the last 5 years alone, the number of Americans that would consider buying a diesel has doubled. In 2006, it was 12%. It's now 25% in March of this year. No reason that number won't continue to climb as well. There are still a lot of misperceptions about diesel. A lot of Americans still remember the old diesels, the failed experiments in the 1980s, the old smoky, smelly, dirty, and slow. That's not the case as we know of today's diesels. But a lot of Americans still believe that, so we have a lot of education to go. So I clearly don't believe that the number that you see at 25% is where the market will peak. In fact, let's take a look at some of the actual sales. This looks at January of 2009 through February of 11. And yes, there are a lot of little bars and graphs. That's not important. What you want to look at is the number that says 12% in January of 2009 to 32% in February of 11. What does that number represent? This is where a consumer had the option to buy a gasoline version of a vehicle or a diesel version of a vehicle. So let's look at that. Very top line is the Jetta wagon, in fact. So you can see the Jetta wagon is peaked out to about 80% are choosing the diesel, only 20% are choosing the gasoline. So that is the options that you have currently on the market. And you can see they range from a low of maybe 4 or 5% up to the high, but the key number there is 32% of people are choosing the diesel when they have the option. One of the main policy goals of the U.S. is petroleum reduction. Less dependence on foreign oil. Consumers get it, they understand it, they demand it. Look at the 4-year period, 2003 to 2007. American pickup truck buyers chose a diesel over gasoline, have saved 21 times more fuel than all the hybrid vehicles combined. So, that helps explain why diesel sales doubled in 2010. That's the numbers that you're seeing up here on the screen. But U.S. policymakers, all you hear them talk about is electric, hybrid, or as we call it, the flavor of the month. Over the last 10 years, we've seen electrics, hybrids, ethanol, natural gas. In fact, 10 years ago, we invested billions of dollars in fuel cells. That was going to be the answer. We still don't have a fuel cell car available in the U.S. to buy. Our role is to make sure that diesel has a voice and that we bring a dose of reality to what policymakers consider when it comes to vehicles. Infrastructure is a key part of that. I think you all know the U.S. is broke. This week, in fact, we hit our legal debt limit of over $14 trillion. So the U.S. Department of Treasury is having to shift money and borrow here and save there until the Congress actually lifts the ability for the country to borrow even more money. But we're currently at $14 trillion in debt. So infrastructure should be a big part of this discussion. You can see on the slide here we have 170,000 fueling stations for gasoline, 80,000 for diesel, and then the numbers dwindle when you get to the alternative technologies that policymakers are talking about day in and day out. You can see 1,000 electric recharging stations in 2009. That number's probably grown a little bit, but not by much. It's a daunting issue, obviously, to think about the infrastructure costs. But what if government doesn't pay for it? What about the private sector? Will the private sector see the value in bringing the charging stations to the U.S. as a business case? Well, interestingly, about a month ago, a study was released at a sustainability conference sponsored by none other than Toyota. And here's what the University of Colorado Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Study had to say. They took a look at a parking garage, 300-spot parking garage, and said, what would it take? They took bids on what it would take to outfit that garage with electric charging stations. Obviously, there was 240-volt chargers, and then the fast 480-volt chargers. $12,400 US per charging station for the 240-volt, and an astonishing $106,000 for the fast chargers. The study by the DOE confirmed that number of $106,000 to $110,000, and it said business investing in these stations would likely pass on the cost to the consumers, or, more importantly, a viable business model for recharging is not yet apparent. So again, the costs are, as they said in the study, mind-boggling. How do we deal with that? With the country being broke, it's going to be very hard to invest in the infrastructure necessary, not only for electric vehicles, but for all the other technologies. Natural gas requires the same infrastructure as do the other technologies. But we need electrics to meet our goals, right? Or do we? Petroleum reduction, diesels can do that. We can do it today without any extra infrastructure. Add renewables to it, even better. We can help reduce petroleum at a larger rate. Well, what about greenhouse gas emissions? Here's a great statistic for you from the U.S. Department of Energy, 2009 report. You'll notice at the bottom, under conventional, a diesel running on B20 had 334 grams per mile of emissions when you look at it from well to wheel, the whole life cycle of the emissions. Now, if we go up to the U.S. grid, plug-in electric hybrid on the U.S. grid, Chevy Volt, 340 grams per mile. Why? Because we're plugging into coal. So you can see that we're spending billions of dollars investing in one technology to accomplish a goal, And what we're saying to policymakers is if you invest in the outcome and not the technology, if you reward the result and not the technology, there are many paths to get there. So again, a diesel running on B20 that you can buy today for $20,000 in the U.S., 334 grams per mile. What we're working towards and spending billions on, 340 plugged into today's U.S. grid. Diesels can do it. We hear a lot about hybrids. Well, let's take a look. There are currently 12 models. If you look at the 12 model rate here for diesels, and the number above them says 2,700 and 6,300. That's the high number. Actually, the numbers range from 1,300 to 2,700 for a diesel, or 2,300 to 6,300 for the hybrid. That's the premium that you're going to pay over the gasoline engine to buy that technology. So you can see the diesels actually have a lower cost of admission to get into the alternative technologies than the hybrids. That plays a part in why consumers, as you can see, are choosing the diesel models about 30% of the time. The 26 models of hybrids is about 5%. Now let's be clear, the Prius would not be included in this. The Prius doesn't have the option of a gasoline only. So the Prius is in a separate category, and I'm not trying to mislead you, but where there is an option of the 26 models, the Ford Fusion Hybrid, the Toyota, the Honda Civic, the Nissan Altima, there you can choose the gasoline or the hybrid, or with the diesels you can choose the option. When you're given the option, consumers are choosing the diesels 30% compared to 5% of the time. They see the total cost of ownership is lower for a diesel and that they'll get their payback quicker when they invest that extra money up front. Diesels are starting to look a little bit like Europe when you look at these numbers. Look at the Audi A3, the Audi Q7, nearing the 50% or actually even topping the 50% mark in the take rates January to December of 2010. And again, the hybrids, 20% is really the peak. Most of the models under 10%. Let's look at what J.D. Power is saying. This is critical. J.D. Power is saying that they're obviously one of the most respected forecasters in the auto industry. And if you look at 2010, you're seeing 2.6% diesel, 2.4% hybrid, 86% gasoline. Now, this is light duty only. Now, if you add medium duty, which obviously is important to SinterCast as well, the numbers jump from 4.6% in 2010 for diesel. So it's a little higher when you include the medium duty. You look at the middle graph, 2015, diesels rise to 6.8%. Again, if you include medium duty, that number is 10%. So they're forecasting 10% diesel already in 2015 if you include light duty and medium duty. But let's just look at the light duty here because, again, it tells a tale. The important number to look at is 2020. 2020, 80% of the cars on the road in America, they predict, will still be powered by the internal combustion engine, diesel or gasoline. In fact, flex fuel, another 10%, and the study says even though people are buying flex fuel vehicles, most of the time the consumer is actually not putting E85 into that vehicle, ethanol into that vehicle. They're powering it with regular gasoline. So at the end of the day, 80% of the vehicles, diesel and gasoline, look at that little sliver, electric's less than 1%. So we're focusing all of our efforts. J.D. Power, the premier forecaster for the industry, still predicts that less than 1% of the vehicles on the road in the U.S. in the next 10 years will be electric. So the coalition sees the opportunities. They're clear. Consumer demand is high, but why aren't more automakers bringing the models that they're selling all over the world to the U.S. market? Many reasons. You really can't fully explain, I won't fully explain, why they're not bringing their diesels to the U.S., but we can surely assume that part of that is regulatory stability. There is a lack of regulatory stability and has been for many years for diesels in the U.S. They have feared not only the weak consumer interest, which now they're seeing there is a consumer interest, but it's the ability for them to bring the models to the U.S., invest the capital necessary to make it a profitable investment to bring their diesel models to the U.S. So what can we do? Coalition goals are pretty clear. We advocate for technology-neutral policies that reward the outcomes. Fuel economy, greenhouse gas reductions, not a specific technology, or as we call it, the flavor of the month. Demonstrate that clean diesel is an important and viable option in the global advanced technology portfolio. There is no silver bullet. We're not going to tell everyone that they should drive a diesel. We believe that consumers, when they're given the option, they will choose the best technology to reduce their fuel consumption and to meet their greenhouse gas reduction needs. We support the OEMs, the automakers, for their introduction of light-duty diesel products in the U.S. and obviously promote the growing consumer acceptance to get there. So what specifically do we do? Well, we try to meet with the policymakers on a daily basis. We've held meetings with members of Congress, over 100 members of Congress, the administration staff, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, NHTSA, which does CAFE. Department of Treasury actually has a car czar for the Obama administration. Department of Energy, state regulators. California obviously plays a critical role, and we'll talk about that. The NGOs, which is the non-governmental organizations or environmental groups, and obviously the automakers themselves. We participated in the public comment sessions for CAFE rules. Again, just trying to level the playing field for diesel in those rules. We've engaged in the LEV 3 process in California. For those of you who don't know what LEV 3 exactly means, it's the low emissions vehicles where they're limiting the tailpipe emissions. Obviously, that was the LEV 2 process actually took diesels out of the market for a number of years until their reintroduction in 2009 when they could meet those LEV 2 standards. So obviously the importance of LEV 3 is important, and we've been actively engaged. In fact, I think it's probably the most critical piece that's going on in the U.S. right now is LEV 3. This will provide regulatory stability on tailpipe emissions until 2025 once it's finalized, and it should be finalized this fall. That'll be the first time we've had a window of over a decade for diesels that they'll know, the automakers will know that they won't have the rug pulled out from underneath them if they bring their diesels to the U.S. market. Combined with CAFE, the federal government's fuel economy regulations, which is now going to creep up to 50, possibly even as high as 62 miles per gallon by 2025, the automakers are going to look at diesel now as an option. They're going to be able to see that we can meet the tailpipe emissions, and it provides them an easier way to get to the CAFE numbers, the higher fuel economy numbers that the federal government is going to require with the existing models and engines that they're selling all over the world. Combined with Euro 6, which also hits in the next few years. So there is a likelihood by 2013-14 that you're going to have one engine, one emissions portfolio that can be sold not only in Europe but in the United States. That's an important key that we haven't had for many, many years. So on Capitol Hill, obviously, we emphasize there is no silver bullet. We need to offer consumers many technology options. That will let them choose how best to maximize their fuel economy and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. But there are obstacles. Like I said, there's opportunities and there's challenges. Here's some of the challenges that we face. Use of real-world driving data when adopting regulations. If you can believe this, in 1975, when fuel economy regulations were put into place in the United States, CAFE as it's called, the breakdown of how they factored was looked at 45% city driving, or I'm sorry, 45% highway driving, 55% city driving. Vehicle miles traveled. How much time vehicle miles traveled at 45 highway, 55 city. That's the way it's been since 1975. In 2006, EPA decided they would take a look at that again. People kept saying, we're seeing this combined number on the sticker when you buy a new car. It would say what the city driving was, what the highway driving was, and then there would be a combined number. And people were buying these new cars and the hybrids especially, and they were saying, I'm not getting that number. I'm not hitting that number. So EPA, because Congress asked them to do so, went back and took a look. Have those numbers changed? Has the driving habits changed? Well, obviously, since 1975, the U.S. has seen a growth of urban sprawl. People are traveling farther to work. And guess what? The numbers are completely flip-flopped. The new number is 57% highway, 43% city. And yet, we see policymakers continuing to develop technologies for urban driving. Battery, electric vehicles, hybrids, all technologies that thrive in start-stop situations. And yet 57% of the miles traveled by Americans are at speeds of 45 miles per hour or higher, or highway speeds. So again, we advocate for the use of real-world driving Let's make sure that we're accurately reflecting American driving habits. Eliminate the diesel fuel tax penalty. There is a 33% higher tax on diesel than gasoline in the United States. So even though we'll encourage people to buy fuel-efficient cars, we're going to penalize them at the pump every time they fill up with a 33% fuel tax penalty. The extension of the advanced vehicle tax credits, or the elimination of all of them. At the end of December, Congress let tax credits for consumers to buy hybrids or diesels expire. You no longer get the tax credit to buy hybrid or diesel starting in January. And yet, the electric vehicles, the 2 electric vehicles that are on the market today, you can get a $7,500 credit to buy in the United States. So right now, with fuel prices at an all-time high, not compared to what you're paying here, but as far as the U.S. at about $4 a gallon, they are only rewarding the consumer to buy 2 vehicles, 2 electric vehicles. No other vehicles are getting any incentives currently in the U.S. market. So our message to automakers is extend the vehicle credits for all technologies or get rid of them all. Level the playing field, let the consumer decide what the best technology is for their own uses. Promotion of well-to-wheel life cycle emissions, again going back to that DOE slide that I showed you, let's look at the life cycle. One of the new proposals from the administration was to change the sticker on the car and we'll give it a letter grade. Is this car an A or a B or a C or a D, or is it failing depending on its fuel economy and its greenhouse gas emissions? Well, again, they were only looking at the tailpipe, so all the electric vehicles were getting A's and all the other technologies were somewhere below. Let's look at the whole picture. Support for renewable diesel expansion and quality standards. In the fall of last year, Audi took the A3, which was the green car of the year, and they ran it from the tip of California to the southern tip of California, over 1,000 miles on renewable diesel made from grass clippings. No degradation in performance, no degradation in fuel economy, still over 40 miles per gallon, running on zero petroleum. So again, diesels today can be that zero petroleum option down the road. We've got a long way to go to make sure that we have good quality biofuels, and probably we'll never be able to meet the demand of what we would actually need. But let's continue to develop them, because today's diesel engine can run on tomorrow's fuel. It really is a zero petroleum option. I think we're being heard. Just in the last week, a resolution was introduced in the House by 2 members of Congress that are getting a little sick of all the favors that are being incentivized for natural gas vehicles, for electric vehicles. And again, these 2 members of Congress said, it is not the role of government to favor one fuel source or energy sector over another. The primary role of the government in the energy markets is to create an economic climate where companies can continue to innovate and compete, and thereby provide value and affordability to families and businesses. Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, the truth is Washington has a dismal record of picking winners and losers, and that's very true. Adopt a balanced approach that promotes technologies equally and requires them to compete against each other. That's the message we've been shouting from the rooftops, so we always get excited when we see members of Congress actually agreeing with what we've said. California environmental organizations, like I said, LEV 3 is probably one of the most important things that's going to happen for the diesel engine and diesel vehicles in the future. So they play a critical role in the overall national debate on vehicles in the United States. And as I mentioned, the environmental groups, or NGOs as we call them, play a very important role in shaping California policy. So you have to get to that root cause of making sure that the environmental groups understand how diesels have changed in the U.S. as well. Too many of them had the same old impressions of dirty, smelly, smoky, and not meeting the emission standards. So to that end, the coalition sponsored last year efforts in Sacramento, the capital of California, sessions to talk about how diesels have changed, but we talked about all the technologies. We're not afraid to talk about all the technologies and again show that we need all of them. We want all of them. Just give diesel the opportunity to compete on that same playing field. So we had presentations from OEMs, suppliers, NGOs, regulators. We live webcasted it, and then we had a ride and drive, again, with all the technologies. We had over 14 cars with electrics, hybrids, natural gas, and diesels for both the environmental groups as well as the regulators to drive. Then in Germany, we stepped it up a notch. We said, let's take these environmentalists to Germany. Let's take them right to the automakers themselves, we took them to Bosch, and we had very intensive dialogues, day-long dialogues at each of these places, and then we took them out on the test tracks. They didn't mind to drive the really fast cars on the test tracks, even though they like to talk about fuel reductions. So we had a great week with them, and I guess one of the ways we can measure success was one of the environmentalists went back to California and he bought a BMW diesel when he got back, so I think we convinced him. 2011, we're stepping it up a little bit. Like I said, I showed you numbers that 79,000 diesels were sold just in last year alone. I think we all know, at least I know, that when you buy a diesel, you become a believer. You actually buy another one, and there are statistics that show that diesel owners buy a second diesel at a much higher rate than they do a second hybrid. So they get it, they get enthused about it. We need to capture that energy. Again, looking at the congressional districts in the U.S. and the way the process works, let's find all of those diesel owners in all the different congressional districts and get them excited and get them contacting their members of Congress and telling them not to take away the diesel option. Don't limit their choices. And again, use that NGO model that we used in California or in Germany last year. We thought it was very successful. It was a great week, intensive dialogue. Let's go to the academic leaders that are writing articles all the time in the U.S., these thought leaders, as we like to call them. Let's take the academic leaders to Germany this fall and do the same thing as we did with the environmental groups. So that trip is in the works as well to see if we can plan something under the coalition banner. Spreading the word. Obviously, the best way to convince somebody to buy a diesel is to get them behind the wheel. They see that they don't lose any power, they're fun to drive, and they get the fuel economy benefits. It would be pretty hard for the coalition on our budget to get every American behind the wheel of a diesel. So instead what we try to do is spread the word through the media. We get journalists behind the wheel. Our members, our automakers supply us vehicles that we can get to journalists. We let them take drives in the car. We tell them about our messages, and then they write about it in print, radio, and TV. And there's just a sampling of some of the articles that we've been quoted in the last 2 years. And obviously, there's the social media. We have our website, cleandieseldelivers.com. And if you're a Twitter fan, you can find us on Twitter at Drive a Diesel. We tweet as often as we can. So if you bring it all together, consumer demand, policymaker education, regulatory stability, a level playing field, we can go to our automakers and we can say, if you build it, they will come. We talk to our automakers frequently. In fact, we doubled our coalition budget in 2010 with their support. They've seen us as a credible thought leader, and sometimes it's better for them to use a coalition to get their message across on diesel than to talk about it as an individual company. So again, they helped sponsor those trips in California and in Germany last year, and we will continue to support our customers as often as we can as they introduce new products to the market. And frankly, it all gets down to market, cars being introduced in the U.S. market. And Bosch predicts, as you can see from this slide, that clean diesel models will double within less than 3 years in the U.S. So this shows you a little bit of what has already been announced or discussed, and then there are a few models still waiting behind the curtains for announcements. We can't predict when those announcements will come, but we're pretty certain that the next 3 years is going to be great for diesels in the U.S. marketplace. So build it, and they will come. Let's hope that we see a lot more headlines like this one in the next few years. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great.